Imagine being the fattest boy in your class, being the weakest student in the entire school, being hated by all of the heroines, and having the worst skills known to mankind. Imagine the worst stats and no signs of getting any better, as this world isn't like the others. That's right, let me introduce you to the protagonist, someone who has the misfortune of being reincarnated into a game character hated by everyone. Do you want to know what led to his demise? Let's find out together. After finishing work, the man prepares himself and leaves for home. His coworkers think that he left immediately to play his stupid game again. They're surprised a grown man is so desperate over a stupid video game. The man returns home to greet his figurine waifus. He's a true weeb and a gamer who specifically set up a gaming station near his workplace. He puts on his VR headset and enters the Dungeon Explorer Chronicle or Dunix game. Entering the simulated world, it is filled with beautiful graphics and jam-packed with action. Dunix dominated the VR MMO genre. During its first launch, the game didn't receive much attention. However, with improvements and the addition of a wide variety of playable content, the game took over the world like a storm. Now, there is hardly any gamer who doesn't know about its existence. Cultured people know that the game's title is one letter away from being completely something different. The man returns to his last saved location. Unfortunately, he has received an uninvited visitor in the form of a rock golem, who is probably the rock's character in this game. The golem unleashes an attack. The man welcomes it, prepares his blade, and proceeds to finish the battle. Being the weeb gamer that he is, the man is addicted to Dunix, exerting himself to the point he gets exhausted while playing. It's also convenient for him, since the game receives a daily update at 6 p.m., and since his shift ends at around 5, it makes it easy for him to play. In fact, this no-lifer actually chose his workplace location, just to suit his schedule. He is looking forward to the latest event of the game. In fact, he got selected as a beta tester for the planned and scheduled update. He thinks that he's going to get those gamer benefits if he performs well in the event. It's a serious matter to him and excites him to a considerable extent. He is exhilarated and wants to hop inside the game moments before its planned update. When he enters the game as his character, the man reflects that this area is supposed to become the event venue. Despite his early arrival, he spots numerous players talking to each other. He finds himself intimidated by their aura and doesn't hope to engage with the other players. Suddenly, he finds his hands trembling. The man finds it impossible to believe that he is nervous of all people. He processes his feelings and realizes that he wants to obtain the beta testing rewards at all costs. Even though the average players can formulate teams and cooperate, at the end of the day, they're common players to him. What makes the beta testers so different is that they're the handful of players who manage to gain insight into the future of the game. He thinks that this event is the most important thing to a Dunix player, which is also why he is excited about it. The man reassures himself that he isn't just any average player. Bro thinks he's the shroud of this world. When the clock hits 6 p.m., he welcomes whatever event lies ahead. That is until he turns his head around and goes WTF at what he sees. The following morning, he wakes up like he usually does. He goes to work and crunches those numbers on the keyboard to do his job. His coworkers are all confused by his strange behavior. They've noticed how he goes home early, and his desk is filled with anime merchandise. They wonder if he is no longer desperate to play his trash game anymore. Weeks passed after the event. He still remembers what he saw that day. A monstrous dragon fell from the skies and became a nightmare event for all of them. That dragon's descent was enough to crush 10% of the players that had participated. The giant beast immediately began firing lasers. Even with their best efforts to lead a counterattack, the dragon proved to be a level 100 beast, with impossible levels of defense, not allowing any damage to cut through. That sounds like a crazy boss monster, but it's so fun to fight at the same time, I imagine. The players managed to finally defeat the giant dragon by sacrificing half the player base in the event. But that was nothing compared to what happened next. After the dragon's defeat, the event stage crumbled, and everything fell into ruin. The deadly stage challenged them to find an exit. To make matters even worse for the players, there was a time limit, significantly ramping up the difficulty. If you thought that was something, lethal traps and a barrage of monsters stopped the players from advancing. The player defeated monsters with all of his might. He stood his ground, relying on his luck. In the end, he was the only survivor left. There was nothing and no one who could clear the stage beside him. Okay, at least he's actually good at the game, for the hours he spends on it, unlike most gamers. Returning home, he showered, ate his meal, and prepared himself once again to enter the Dunix world. The man is pumped and finally receives an update mail that he had been expecting. The contents scare him at first, but it's really the terms of the agreement that he has to sign. Apparently, the message relays that he will be transported inside the game upon starting. He doesn't know what that means and wonders if it's some new update or a phrase of some kind. The man is aware that the game developers are basically crazy for their treatment of the previous event. He doesn't want to think too much about the mail and moves ahead. The man is greeted with a character options screen. He can either auto-pick or choose a custom character to create on his own. He finds himself burdened by the choices and realizes that beta testers aren't allowed to use pre-made characters. Being the lazy gamer that he is, he makes a crucial mistake and decides to let the game handle his fate by choosing the auto-pick option. This is the biggest decision he ever makes that massively impacts the story. Keep on watching. After the selection, the game finally initiates. At once, he is transported to a classroom environment, manifesting as his new character. He recognizes the speaker on stage and realizes that he actually knows everyone in the hall. In fact, this is the very beginning of the Dunix game. The man is under the impression that the developers made some changes and replaced the initial chapters of the game with this large update. He shits his pants when he realizes something important. Despite the game's incredible quality, one could tell that its graphics were all just computer generated. But now it's different. He can feel everything as if it is real. He gathers his thoughts and wonders about the kind of world he has stumbled into. He knows that this isn't the original Dunix game, as the game requires exclusive gloves and goggles devices to play it. This time, it's not that he is playing as a character, but in fact, he is in the game himself. The man notes that he has been physically transported inside the game and assumes that this world is a recreated version of Dunix. He questions what happened to his real body and doesn't really have any answers to that question. The man has reason to believe in two possibilities. He theorizes that either his consciousness is transported inside the game, or his entire body is overwritten in his new character. Usually, one has to log out of Dunix by moving into the classroom. He can't do much right now except wait for the story to progress. There is also the fact that he doesn't really want to go home in the first place. I mean, it's the perfect escape from reality. Who would want to go home after that? The announcer marks the end of the entrance ceremony and tells the students to return to their class. Class he is told to exit first. Being the loser that he is, it's not a miracle he ended up in Class C. There are 5 classes in total, with Class C being the lowest of them all. He contemplates his decision whether to return home at all. There is the problem of having to pay rent or deal with his workplace. On the flip side, he gets the opportunity to become overpowered in this brand new world. He wants to be a part of the world of his favorite characters, as well as the heroines for their interesting plots. We finally get to see a proper view of this fat flob, as he could barely climb the flight of stairs. He hasn't realized that he looks like this, and thinks that he will enjoy this new world to its fullest. And when he does find a way home, he'll think about it. The pieces begin falling into place, because he can't understand why he's feeling exhausted. He thinks that it's the stairs, until he sees his reflection in the mirror. The man is offended to oblivion to find himself as the most hated character. This fat flob is actually the pervert who approached one of the heroines and constantly harassed her, amassing a terrible reputation. When he tried to harass the main character of the game, he saw flashing lights, was knocked out, and was finally expelled. He has become Narumi Seiyuda, the nemesis of the school, who is also nicknamed Budao. For convenience, we'll use Budao as his name from now on. Budao thinks that this is the worst outcome of all. His body weighs 100 kilograms, which makes him more of a nerf than anything. The other students have already started bullying him for his weight. What makes everything worse is that the heroine, Budao, harassed Heis Kaoru, the champion of the national kendo tournament. She's an excellent student who has top-tier looks as well. She's supposed to be a person of integrity and character until it comes to Budao. Budao is someone she deeply despises because he harassed her before the entrance ceremony. Budao isn't even important in any regard. He isn't the main character's rival of any kind. Even the man himself isn't passionate for this character. Instead of being strong, he's just an obstacle and an overall trash NPC character. He realizes that he shouldn't have selected the auto-pick option. Following the story, Heis Kaoru is supposed to become one of the main characters of their class. Kaoru already hates him, so he doesn't want anything to do with her. Suddenly, he experiences a sudden aching in his chest. He doesn't know why he feels that way, and suddenly realizes that Budao's original emotions are actually influencing him in some ways. To summarize, not only does he have a crappy body, He is absolutely hated by the girls, and now he is also nerfed by having Budao's original memories. His problems only worsen along the way, giving him more stress than he can take. Budao thinks that he should go to class, hoping to find a logout button. He doesn't have much hope, knowing that this is no longer the game world that he once knew of. He's nothing more than Budao, which will resultantly break Dunex's original storyline. Budao wants to form an amicable relationship with Kaoru so that he can at least get rid of one problem. When he enters class, Kaoru spots him and shoots him a deadly glare. Just when he thought he could save himself by befriending Kaoru, the opposite happened. And so, after transporting to another world, his second life as a trash mob character begins. Budao receives the worst glare from Kaoru, which makes him realize that this guy isn't getting on the baddie's good side soon enough. He knows that the seat placement in his class is based on grades, so he can't really cop any seat he likes. Budao finally finds his spot, only to realize that he's the backbencher of his class. This adds to the fattie's list of problems, as not only did he end up in Class C, but he is also the worst student in this class, and the lowest ranking student in the entire school. Every time you think you've got bad luck, remember this idiot, and be happy you're not him. The entrance exam of this school is actually 100 times harder than others, making it an elite school. He doesn't know how Budao managed to get in, but he did, so he feels proud and confident in himself. Suddenly, he sees a man in a nice suit, who would definitely steal your girlfriend, enter the class. He's the homeroom teacher, and explains that he will first introduce himself, and then talk about their school. Budao listens keenly. Their teacher is Murai Hajime, an alumni of Adventurers University. After his simple introduction, Hajime explained about the school. Everything up until this point is still in the context of the game. Even though it's something he has seen happen in the game, Budao thinks that experiencing the information firsthand feels entirely different. It's as if he can feel the weight of his teacher's every word. He can also feel the anxiety of the other students. Becoming an adventurer in this world allows you to pursue an amazing profession that gets you popularity and fame. It's a name that is only given to the ones that are allowed to dive into dungeons. Competition is unusually difficult. Thankfully, this school grants you special privileges. Budao already knows most of the information being presented, and thinks that he should seriously contemplate his career choices if he can't return to his previous world. Thankfully, the elite school allows them a number of options to take upon graduation. There is the choice to remain and continue education in the adventurer's school, and there is also the option of being scouted by companies. This is done so as to train students in dungeons. In fact, Dunex literally uses dungeons and explorations as its main theme. The main focus of the game is directed towards dungeon diving. Not to mention, the resources acquired from dungeons support the energy industries, so they're simultaneously the best place for companies to scout young talents. Budao feels compelled to dive aggressively, but he doesn't feel confident about challenging the dungeon in his state. Their teacher, Murai, reminds them to dive into dungeons with the help of their friends and use their classmates as an advantage. He then proceeds to hand over the terminal to each student. Finally, Budao is given his terminal, which reveals a wristwatch that he can wear. Budao thinks that this object will allow him to return to his previous world, and it's actually the menu system used in the game. The watch features many smartphone capabilities as well as other functions. Its most important feature is to allow the player to log out of the game. Nothing goes according to his expectations, as Budao discovers he has the worst stats known to mankind, as a level 1 fat pig with the skills of a glutton. He finds this status the worst he has ever received, and realizes that it must be a work of terrible luck. Now, he has 5 blocks of problems that he can't really solve. The man was born with nerfs all around. He begs to be freed from his misery, and tries to locate the logout function. However, Budao quickly realizes that there isn't any button for him to log out with. Yeah, trust me, guys, neither of us wouldn't want to be like him, this poor guy. Class D receives a similar introduction from their teacher. These guys aren't as pleasant or easygoing as Class E because they have bullies. Their leader plans to raid Class E right after the introduction phase ends. Meanwhile, Budao is covered in drool, thinking about his problems. He tries to cope with the situation, thinking that he always wanted to come to the Dunex world. The only problem is that he was transported as Budao and didn't know what to do beyond that. The only skill he has is Glutton, which doesn't make things any better. This feels like a gamer's hell instead of a paradise. He started playing the Dunex game ever since he became a student. His passion for the game persevered, even throughout his adult life. Even though he won the monstrous beta tester event, an experienced Dunx player like him still has no idea what this stupid skill means. He dreads the possibility of starting the game in such a miserable place. He doesn't know how to use this stupid skill, as it would only benefit Gorlock, the destroyer, in any universe. Budao wonders if he has this skill specifically because he is fat. He wants to learn other skills and override his stupid fate by going to the dungeons. Suddenly, Class E gets raided by the delinquents of Class D. The delinquent fatty, who basically looks like Budao with longer hair, tells them that Karia Isamu requires a subordinate from their trash class. They want each student of Class E to show their status skills. Objecting to their sudden demands is Kaoru, who argues that they're not meant to comply, even if they're classmates. Her objection allows her to receive the support of Class E, who also shares her opinion. She bashes Class D for thinking that their class is better. The double-chinned eater of worlds emphasizes that they're not equals. That's because he and the rest of Class D have been dungeon diving since they were 12 years old. This means that their levels are much greater than those of every student in Class E. The delinquent reminds Class E that his previous demand wasn't just a request, but an absolute order. Saying this, he lets out a show of tremendous aura that zaps each student in their class. Budao feels the incredible might of the aura, and it's enough to render Kaoru intimidated. She stays quiet, while the Class D raider persists in his demands. Budao reflects that this is the use of the aura skill, which is normally only used in special places like the dungeon. The fact that this bully tried to use it on those with lower levels to intimidate them and say, "You're all trash as fudge," says a lot. Budao is called the first student for the inspection. It's funny how one fat pig is calling the other fat pig a fatso. Budao is told to show his terminal. He gets up from his seat and politely takes his terminal to them. The Class D raider laughs at his low status and basically calls him an NPC character. Budao's emotions compel him to shove a fist in his face, but he wants to maintain his weakling status. Bro almost became a victim of his intrusive thoughts, LOL. Next in line, a goddess of beauty is called up next, boasting two interesting plots. Sanju Sakurako introduces herself and is actually nicknamed Pink Chan in the game. She's one of the heroines in Dunx and a playable character. Using Sanju's perspective, one can find the main character's route. She's one of the characters that skyrocketed Dunx to fame. The bully thinks that her level 1 status is as expected, and her abilities are trash too. But he's got his eyes set on her beauty and offers her a chance to join their party. Sanju's at a loss, and she trembles to form an answer. Budao knows that the rest of them have already recognized Class D's difference in powers. They'll never be able to defeat Karia, even if all of them jumped him Jujutsu Kaisen style. Sanju struggles to respond, while the bully tries to grab her. Suddenly, the main character of the Dunx game catches his hand, and righteously takes a stand for his classmate. The main character grips the bully's hand tightly, and argues that Sanju doesn't want to become a part of their group. Akagi Yuuma introduces himself, and declares that he will become the strongest man in this school. The Class D bullies laugh at his words, as anyone would, for saying goofy crap like that. Least obvious main character dialogue be like. One man towers over Akagi with his dominating presence. The use of his monstrous aura skill is enough to intimidate the rest of Class E. He hounds Akagi for naively thinking of adventurers and getting ahead of himself. Karia's underlings try to explain that it's just the ramblings of a guy who doesn't know his place. Karia questions if Akagi is fine with a month's worth of time, as he wants to test the boy's resolve to become the strongest. He challenges him to a duel with safety rules included, meaning Akagi won't die. Karia explains that there are a lot of monsters in their school, and if Akagi can't even get past Karia's level, he's going to get thrashed by the upper-ranked students. Akagi finds himself pumped and accepts the challenge. Karia chooses to remember his words and leaves the class. He warns him to be at least ready to lose his arm. The rest of his class praised Akagi for his outstanding resolve. Akagi thinks that he shouldn't be praised, as he was acting in the heat of the moment. Sanju and the others apologize for getting him into trouble, but Akagi doesn't mind. The noble adventurer became a role model in front of Kaoru's eyes. She enrolled in the academy because she admired such qualities. At the same time, she wanted to distance herself from one particular individual, a fiancé that happens to be Narumi Seiyuda or Budao. Kaoru remembers sharing a better time with him when they were kids. Even though he was a coward, Budao was honest. He supported her when the other boys picked on her, and even jumped in to protect her. However, he has now become a shadow of his previous self. She wanted to get away from him as much as possible, and ended up taking the entrance exam for that reason. I feel sorry for both of them. On the other hand, he protected her when she was weak, and she isn't doing the same. Yikes. When she received the letter of acceptance from the academy, she was happy. That is until Budao told her that he was also accepted into the adventurer's school and looked forward to his upcoming 3 years. Kaoru was so fed up that he chased her into the academy. She knows that his family runs a general store and they actually worry about her a lot. She wanted to try and look at him another way. His parents even begged Kaoru to teach him sword skills. Kaoru accepted the offer because she couldn't refuse them for their generosity ever since she was little. She also wanted to reward him for passing the entrance exam. Their training soon began, and Kaoru was left to wonder about the amount of effort Budao had managed to put into getting inside the academy. He impressed her in some ways until they actually started training properly. Budao refused to cut down on his food, didn't like to wake up early, and when he started running, he already wanted to stop. She found it pointless and quickly grew annoyed by his attitude. Budao became grumpy and hounded her, working so hard to get into the adventurer's school. He didn't understand why he had to go through such difficult training. While Kaoru thinks that it's an amazing feat to become a part of the prestigious school, there is the problem that his arguing with the upperclassmen would put him in trouble. Kaoru thought that Budao expected her to match his pace because she always treated him gently. That's because he passed the exam, leading Budao to believe that he is entitled to that treatment. Kaoru is beginning to realize that Budao actually became the way that he is because of her spoiled treatment. She wanted to change the way she thought of herself and become less lenient with him. Kaoru formed a cold and callous response, vowing to leave him behind. Uttering those words, she ran away from her childhood friend while he ranted all about. She didn't want to pursue him any longer. At present, Kaoru regrets that Budao doesn't have redeeming qualities like Akagi. While Budao is busy keeping to himself, Kaoru comes over to him and questions why he is acting differently. Kaoru demands an explanation. Budao doesn't know what to say and apologizes because he wants to do something. Kaoru leaves him to himself and recalls how it's only been 2 weeks since their training. Knowing that he showed no interest in training, Kaoru ultimately decided that they should stop training altogether. The only reason she wanted to continue the training was because of his parents. Kaoru internalizes that her love for him has completely faded into nothingness. She no longer wants to interact with Budao and hopes to level up as soon as possible. To do that, she needs to take care of her biggest and most difficult problem. The very reason the two of them are fiancés is because it is written on a magical marriage contract. She can't exactly reject him because it's written on paper. Kaoru is afraid that he will become lustful of her body and order her around for indecent requests. Kaoru's greatest goal is to void the marriage contract with Budao as soon as she possibly can. Budao arrived at the dungeon. After attending school, a player is required to visit the heroine's house, which happens to be Hei's Kaoru herself. He was heading there, and surprisingly found a general store for his family, reluctant to enter his own house. Budao is pleasantly surprised to meet his family, and finds his room to be the definition of filth. He notes that the 2 characters from before are definitely Budao's family. Such information wasn't actually presented in the Dunix game, but this world is making adjustments to account for the missing information. Budao thinks that this is unfavorable to him, because his only advantage is that of a player. He thinks that he will be completely useless at this point. Budao expresses the desire to dive deep into the dungeon to test his abilities. Suddenly, he gets a ringing sensation and decides to clean up for the day. While he is cleaning, strangely, he finds himself knowing everything. Budao thinks that it's because of the memories of his body and that it's useful he knows this much. Even though he doesn't remember everything at once, he is concerned about Kaoru's invitation from before, which actually happened to be on behalf of training. He discovers the magical contract that Kaoru had been thinking about before. Budao knows that the magical contract pertains to the 2 of them. He believes that it's just the ramblings of a kid. He tries to look through his memories and decides to keep the contract because it seems important. After cleaning up his room, Budao immediately tasks himself by exploring the dungeons. He arrives in a tracksuit and asks the receptionist to sign him up for the dungeon. She requested identification, so Budao showed her the terminal device. The receptionist tells him to enter his name and ID. Budao thinks lowly of himself and knows that even the receptionist must be making fun of him. He arrives in the hall where many other participants are present. They're all standing in wait. Budao takes a step forward and enters the blackened door. What seems like a state of void actually leads to the dungeon. Budao passes through the barrier between the world and the dungeon. He wonders if the dungeon is a famous tourist location, as there are a lot of people. He travels deep and finds himself surrounded by fewer people. Suddenly, Budao senses a lurking presence behind him. He discovers a slime that looks straight out of a horror movie. Budao prepares his trusty bat and bashes the slime with all of his might. He's happy to have defeated the monster and congratulates himself for subjugating a creature in his first dive. Budao is happy about his achievement, but he knows he has to struggle to get ahead in his levels. He wants to test if the dungeon is exactly as shown on the map. Budao manages to locate the slime room. The slime creatures actually merge in this area to grow. Their skills largely remain the same, but this is the best way to grind your skills and level up. Budao is faced with another slime, who chases after him and quickly merges to become a creature of his height. Budao attacks this monster and is able to defeat it. He doesn't feel as much fear because of his experience playing the game. Thankfully, Budao obtained level 2 in the end. A jolt of energy surges through his body as all of his stats are raised because of the level up. Budao thinks that he will end up getting addicted to the level up grinding and quickly get ahead of his class. At the same time, he doesn't know why the place is so vacant, because players are known to use this location as a hunting ground. Budao knows that the slime room isn't off limits based on the fact that he is able to enter inside. He thinks that it's the perfect location for him to experiment with his skills, as they also exist in the game. There is also the handicap of levels associated with skills. There are 3 exceptions to the rule. The first is the aura skill that the Class D students used against them. The second skill is called Torch, allowing the person to produce a light source. And finally, the last skill is basic healing. Budao is able to use these 3 skills at once, which could be activated in a number of ways. He tries to use the Torch ability by means of manual activation. Budao remarks that there is little difference in terms of the gameplay itself and the world. He proceeds to test out a high-level attack, which really doesn't work, even though he was hopeful that it would work. Suddenly, the attack registers and releases a thunderous bolt of energy emanating from his bat. The Class D bully is also taking part in the dungeon raid and recalls that he has been doing as much ever since he was 12. He's actually the second lowest in his class. The only reason he doesn't feel sad about his rank is because he has Class C to bully at his leisure. Imagine being the weakest punk in your class, so you bully freshmen. El Bozo in the comments for this guy. As for Budao, he's currently knocked out. Budao regains consciousness in the medical office of the guild, where he is explained that he ran out of magical power and was found unconscious around slimes. Budao gets embarrassed and explains that it was his first time entering the dungeon, and he gets exhausted and runs out of power. He was aware the next day of his dungeon dive. Budao intentionally kept the abilities of his magical powers a secret. He still doesn't know why, or how he was able to activate a skill that he hasn't even learned. Budao chose to keep the information regarding his skill a secret, so as not to be called a fool. Right now, he has 4 glaring weaknesses: his fat body, the fact that the main characters of the story hate him, and the fact that he can see Budao's memories, and his incredibly low stats. Budao thinks that his problems are only getting worse at this point. He returns home to find himself presented with a delicious meal. Budao realizes that this is obviously bad for him and requests his mother to cut down on his portions. Her mother is confused since she cooked his favorite meal. Budao explains that he wants to go on a diet and prefers a more vegetable-focused meal plan. His sister is alarmed by his words. Budao tells his family that he wants to get rid of his chubbiness, even though his sister tells him that he's as perfect as he is. Budao is aware that the duel between Akagi and Kariya will be held in a month. He knows that his class is obviously trembling in fear. Even if they do prevail by defeating Kariya, there is the problem of the higher classes and the upperclassmen, which will inevitably lead to an all-out school war. Budao hopes to prepare himself for the upcoming events. He desires to level up so that he can obtain information about the world and why he got transported and specifically became Budao. He wants to obtain information at all costs. Later at night, Budao thinks that he has no clue about how he got transported. The thing that intrigues him the most is the activation of his unlearned skills from the other day. Logically, it makes no sense that he is able to activate such a skill, which is why he fears that it is a bad thing. Budao struggles with the idea of whether others could also use the same ability. He thinks that perhaps he is the only person who is capable of using such an ability, which could very well flip the entire story on its head. He doesn't want the story to take an unforeseen path, as it will become harder for him to predict the future. Budao prioritizes his skill training and wants to attempt the dungeon again. The following day, as he is about to leave, Budao's sister comes racing ahead. She wants him to take her along in the dungeon dive. Budao rejects her and slams the door shut. While he is busy thinking, he unfortunately bumps into the one guy he shouldn't have, the Class D student who raided their class the other day. He points to Budao's companion, who is revealed to be his sister, who stalked him on the way through. Budao's sister carelessly confronts the Class D student and scolds him for bumping into her brother. This infuriates the Class D student, but he chooses to let go of the matter by turning his tail. Budao is relieved that he got away from that mess and shouts at his sister for acting stupid. Budao doesn't want his sister to tag along because that means she will be able to see his skills. She expresses the desire to hunt monsters in the dungeons and wants to tag along. Budao decides to take a different approach and tells her that the registration process isn't eligible for her due to age. She turns tail at once and tells him that she will be returning home. Budao is glad that she left him alone and decides to enter the guild's library. The reason he came here is to do some research in regard to his unlearned skills. The first way to cast a specific spell is by auto-casting it. This is done through a shortcut key, but he doesn't know how the mechanics work in this world. The second way to do so is by means of manual casting. This is what he deployed by maneuvering his physical body. Budao tries to scavenge information on auto-casting and discovers that one has to chant their magical powers to cast a spell. When he is done with his research for auto-casting, he looks for ways to manually cast for skilled users. To his astonishment, there is nothing in the guidebooks that talks about manual casting, even though he was able to do it just fine. Budao has confirmed that his unlearned skill isn't a default thing in this world that just about everyone can use. This means he is the only person capable of using such an ability. Budao thinks that it has complicated his usage of skills. He finds himself perplexed and doesn't understand a thing about this world. There are more students from his school than in the original game. Bad things get even worse when the Class D punk greets the fatso again. He is disgusted by the fact that he is researching how to cast skills and mocks him for not being able to defeat a slime. This comment alone strikes Budao as shocked. On the other hand, his sister overhears the conversation between the other students, who discuss the rumor of the fat flob and how he got defeated by a small slime. Budao's sister is alarmed and begs the student to tell her more about the matter. Back to Budao, he questions what the Class D punk is talking about. The bully tells him that he saw it with his own eyes. Budao was carried back on a stretcher while on floor 1 that only boasted slimes. Budao shivered at the realization that it looked like a level 1 slime actually defeated him. He offers the weakling some protection by Class D because he isn't even capable of defeating a slime. Budao quickly reads between his words and realizes that they're looking for someone who can carry their stuff. It's basically the role of a slave. Budao politely declines the offer. At once, he is intimidated by the aura skill cast by the Class D delinquent. Budao knows that he can't win against the student, as he belittles him for being a small fry from a pathetic class. He reminds him that Budao is the weakest and amounts to nothing in the adventurer school as a whole. His words sharply isolate the boy. Instead of rejecting his words, Budao reflects that his opponent stands corrected. At this moment, he is nothing, and he has nothing to be proud of. There is no place for him at the academy, and they collectively wish for his disappearance. At this rate, it's only a matter of time before Budao eventually disappears from class. This is the kind of world he was living in. Budao knows it with his heart more than anyone else. He begins to weep, which makes the Class D bully laugh as he ridicules him for weeping. Suddenly, Budao's sister intervenes and shoves him away. Budao thinks that perhaps he has found a reason to cling to something. Budao's sister comes to the rescue and grabs his hand. While she insists that he come with her at once, the Class D lunatic towers over her and belittles the girl for thinking she could escape so easily. He reminds her that they're in the middle of a conversation. Budao understands the gravity of the situation and begs his sister to apologize at once. The Class D bully uses his aura skill and is shocked to see the girl standing unafraid. She glares at him. The bully is about to strike her down. Budao begs his sister to apologize to the student at once. Suddenly, Budao's real emotions intervene, and he tackles the Class D student. Budao realizes that the absolute worst has just happened because his body moved on its own. He realizes that this happened because of Budao's feelings. His intervention annoys the Class D punk, who grabs him at once. The crybaby latches onto his hand and resists his aura skill. Just when he is to receive an attack from his opponent, a knight in shining armor breaks off their battle. She even offers to fight in Budao's stead and wonders if the Class D student would like that. Tenma Akira, who is ranked the second strongest student in the academy, interferes in their affair. She states that this is because they're her colleagues, and that she hopes for them to get along. Because of her intervention, the Class D student is forced to leave. Even though she de-escalated the situation from getting worse, the Class D punk reminds Budao that he will remember this later. Saying this, he walks away. Tenma Akira is actually a beautiful girl who wears full metal armor. Because she was cursed to have a fat and ugly body, she now covers herself fully. She gives the two of them a thumbs up for standing their ground. Saying those words, she leaves. Budao's sister hugs him and apologizes for her behavior. Budao decides to take her elsewhere. He questions why she returned to him. His sister explains that she never wanted to participate in the guild and hoped she could become an adventurer so that she could earn some attention from her brother. She apologizes to him for lying, while Budao recalls that it was his internal feelings for his little sister that made him jump like that. He wonders if Budao is secretly a really nice guy deep down. He almost feels bad borrowing his body in such a way. Budao apologizes for being busy in the academy and promises to pay more attention to her from now on. He only said these words because he thought the real Budao would say the same. His words made his sister happy. Budao tells Kano to go home first because he can enter dangerous dungeons and wants to grind his levels. Well, when he returns home, he's in an absolute mess. His family is alarmed because they think he has injured himself. Budao explains that he is fine, while his mother relays that Kano has been sulking because he is not able to go to the dungeon. Kano ignores him until Budao promises to take her to the dungeon one day. She jumps in excitement even though Budao reveals that he's only doing this because it will be necessary for the adventurous school. The following day, Budao kneels in front of the Class D punk and apologizes for his actions. The bully is astonished, while Budao thinks that there is a reason Class D receives so much hate inside the school. This is also why the Class D students went out of their way to raid them the other day. The main problem is that Budao rebelled when he shouldn't have. He doesn't care for his shame and apologizes to the Class D student for his actions. Budao internalizes that he is trash and has nothing at his disposal. The Class D bully tells him that they should relocate somewhere else. Budao reflects that he doesn't have the goal of securing a good isekai life. He wants to investigate the mystery behind his transport and hopes to return to his previous world. In the meantime, he got himself slammed by the punk for defying him. Budao hopes to protect his family and wants to repay Budao in some regard. He knows that his proper school life will begin on Monday. The only goal in his mind is to level up so that he can increase his abilities and skills. At the same time, he wants to use his powers to protect himself as well as his family. That is the reason Budao doesn't hope for the events to change. The next day, while having breakfast, Kano informs Budao that someone has come to visit him. Budao opens the door to find Kaoru standing in front of him. Budao quickly found himself in the dungeon with his friends. Before that, he was on his way to the school with Kaoru. He used Budao's memories and discovered that Kaoru shared a mysterious promise with him to go to school together. Budao recalls that Kaoru hates him the most. He tries to strike a topic of discussion and wonders if Budao would try to do the same. After trailing her for a while, Kaoru speaks of the rumor of his embarrassing defeat caused by a slime. Budao is yet again annoyed because he knows the long-haired bully has spread the word across the school. Kaoru turns to look at him and explains that she has formed a party with Akagi and has no interest in joining Budao's party. Her harsh words sting Budao's emotions. He's reacting harshly to her words, even though this is a canon event that happens in the game. Akagi forms a part with Kaoru in the effort to save the world. Because the events are still on track with the game's main storyline, Budao thinks it is convenient for him. Upon entering class, he faces immediate scrutiny from the rest of his classmates for being beaten by a slime. Every student in his class laughs at the fatso who lost to a creature that even a kid could defeat. Kaoru and Akagi jump to his defense. Akagi becomes the voice of reason and politely associates himself with Budao. He explains that they were all worried and surprised. Budao reflects that Akagi Yuuma is basically the main character and the vessel for the player inside the game. Since there is no player in this world, Akagi's body is empty. Budao doesn't want to approach him to shift the dynamic of the story carelessly. The rest of his classmates continue to slander the pig that lost to the slime. They even collectively decide to call him Budao. Budao is surprised because, in the original story, he wasn't given this name until later. He wonders if it is because of Akagi's interference that progresses the story this much. He still finds himself out of place and isolated in his class. Their homeroom teacher arrives to explain to the students that they'll be needing groups to dive into dungeons. He wants to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Budao thinks that he can swing for damage control this way. Their teacher explains that they'll be using their grades for the order of instruction. Akagi is the first one to introduce himself. He uses a one-handed sword and aspires to become a great warrior. Kaoru is the second one to introduce herself. More and more students follow. Budao, on the other hand, is left conflicted because he wants to keep a low profile. He doesn't want to hinder the progress of the story, even though he acknowledges the need to form a party. He thinks that being cheerful is a good approach. Mirai gives him the green signal for his introduction. Budao delivers the cringiest introduction known to mankind, and states that he aspires to become a priest. His overly enthusiastic approach is enough to render me second-hand embarrassment, let alone his classmates. The sound of silence takes over the class, and even Mirai is left speechless. He quickly segues the conversation towards orientation. Mirai explains that they'll be able to use the guild's facilities, even after graduation. After their class, Budao, the fat, lonely pig, is left to himself with no one to accompany him. At this rate, he thinks he'll become a solo adventurer. Budao paces ahead and follows his class. Mirai shows them the arena, which they can use to train their skills. He also shows them the medical office with a priest on standby. As for entering dungeons, Mirai emphasizes that they shouldn't be walking around on the first and second floors by themselves, and orders the students to make a group of 3 to 5 people. Budao realizes that this is obviously directed at his roomer and feels pissed off at his teacher. Mirai instructs them to gather in the plaza in an hour and help themselves in the meantime. The moment he leaves, the students start to gossip around each other. They're all worried they will be left out, which is why they want to have a party at once. One of them even slams Budao out of the way. Budao tries to extend his hand to some of the students, but they're quick to reject him and laugh in his face. Budao can't find anyone. He sulks because the parties were all made based on the relationships people shared. Unfortunately, he doesn't have any. He thinks that it's only natural for them to ignore the failure of a loser like him. Budao stares at Akagi, who is approached by many people and is constantly declining. Surprisingly enough, Akagi runs towards Budao and requests that they team up. Budao is literally shocked, and he thinks that this is some sick joke. The problem is that, if he keeps interacting with Akagi, the story will shift and move in a different direction. The only reason he has been able to survive so far is because of his future knowledge of the storyline, which he deems invaluable. Budao reflects that if his actions somehow influence Akagi for the worse, then the Dunix world will be destroyed. He tries to decline the offer politely, but doesn't really have an excuse to refuse Akagi. He wants to use Kaoru as an excuse, but thinks that it would only worsen his relationship with Kaoru. He sees her looking this way. Kaoru runs towards them, which makes him think that she'll be the one to save him and take Akagi away. Everything goes to hell when Kaoru insists that she wants to join the party as well. And that's how he joined the party with the 2 others. He doesn't even comprehend why he's in the same group, as Kaoru should have hated him from the start. Now that he has found himself in this group, Kaoru wants to ask about the situation, revolving around the main character. He tries to spark a conversation with Akagi, but Kaoru glares at him with a clear message that he should not interact. Budao comprehends the message clearly, and recalls that he has been loathed in the original game since the beginning because of his jealousy of the main character. That's why she's trying to stop him from ruining everything. Akagi doesn't want to ignore Budao and allows him a chance to speak. Budao knows that Kaoru has her sharp eye on him, which means he can't make her suspicious. He asks a casual question and asks Akagi about his inspiration to become an adventurer. Akagi thinks for a moment and reveals that it is because of admiration. He explains that he has grown up to admire other adventurers and apologizes for not being able to give a proper answer. Budao is stunned by this answer, as Akagi is originally supposed to be a vessel for the players. Still, in this world, even though admiration isn't a good motive, he stands his ground, even with the power difference between him and Karia. He's a mere high school freshman at this moment. Budao wants to support Akagi's ambitions as a human, and clarifies that what he said was actually an admirable response in itself. Kaoru is stunned by his reply, while Budao thinks that he's jumped the gun and gotten ahead of himself. On the second floor of the dungeon, the student orientation wraps up nicely. Mirai tells them that they can hunt with their party members and resume classes from tomorrow. He dismisses the class. Budao wants to rent a weapon for himself, while Akagi personally approaches him for their mission to dive into the 3rd floor. Akagi formally invites Budao to join their party. The perspective shifts to Kaoru. When she visited Budao's house to ask about his condition, Kano didn't greet her nicely. Even with Kaoru's insistence, Kano told Kaoru that her brother was fine. Kaoru thought that it was only fair she was getting this kind of treatment from Kano since she had been giving Budao the cold treatment. Budao was surprised to meet her. The purpose of Kaoru's visit was to cancel the magical contract. However, she found herself incapable of uttering those words because she thought he would be persistent enough to decline her words. The two of them went to school together. Kaoru kept an observant eye on him. She knew that he acted weird ever since the entrance ceremony. He's too cautious, in fact. She remembers the old Budao who called her many times and got mad at her for not picking up. Kaoru wondered if people could change so easily and decided to test his resolve. She informed him that she had joined a party with Akagi. Therefore, she wouldn't be able to join his party. Instead of reacting negatively, Budao wished her the best of luck and told her that it was good to have Akagi's support. Kaoru knew that Budao wasn't the kind of person who could mask his feelings so well. She wondered if he was disinterested in her at this point. She was happy at first, but when he received ill treatment in his class for his recent defeat against the slime, Kaoru was forced to jump for his support. Akagi happens to become the voice of reason and approaches Budao, just like when he objected to Karia's terror. Akagi Yuma became the boy she wanted to follow as a role model. However, she was bound by the magical contract. The contents of the contract annoyed her. There was a penalty and the line regarding it that made things complicated. Akagi approached Kaoru and wanted to form a party with her. Kaoru felt honored and inquired why. Akagi explained that she was the first to raise her voice against the tyrants of Class D also. There wasn't really any penalty in the contract itself. It's not that she hated Seiyuda, but she could have infinitely concentrated more without his presence. She banded a party with Tashiji Naoto, who was an aspiring wizard, as well as Sanju Sakurako, who is an aspiring priest. As for Akagi, he didn't want to be careless because of his duel against Karia, which was only a month away. Karia's imposing powers were speculated to be around level 10, since leveling up allowed people to enhance their physical strength and also choose a job. All of them aspired to train harder and eventually claim job-related skills. She thinks that it is possible to do it with her current party members. There is also the fact that they have a secret weapon at their disposal, which she thinks is herself. In their dungeon exploration mission, she sparked a conversation with Akagi, who mostly redirected the conversation to a different topic. He also tried to give Budao a chance to speak. Kaoru knew that he was considerate of Budao, who had lost to a mere slime. Upon receiving Akagi's motivation to become an adventurer, Kaoru also wanted to participate, but she stopped from doing so because she wanted to distance herself from Budao as a person. When Akagi announced that he would be inviting someone to their party, she already knew that it was going to be Budao. Naoto argued that welcoming a person with terrible rumors surrounding them might give their party a bad reputation in their class. They also don't know what Budao thinks of this invitation. Akagi tells them that he will try to recruit Budao and hopes they will help him out. Even though it will cause them trouble, he thinks it's fine as long as they can defeat Karia. Naoto and the others are fine with his decision, but Kaoru feels different. She doesn't want to sign for his approval. She thinks that Budao will trust Akagi because he has lost interest in Kaoru. Kaoru thinks that he will join their party easily and has no reason to decline. But what ends up happening is quite different. Budao is defensive and questions why he's being recruited. Akagi tries to come up with a reason and states that it's because he complimented him. He thinks that it is the same as Kaoru raising her voice against the Class D members. Akagi is shut down when Budao tells him that their fight against Karia is no easy challenge, as he is level 11 and a monster for an opponent. He thinks that it's a bad idea to add him to the crew and asks if Akagi is hoping to win the teacher's approval. Budao almost ridicules Akagi for inviting a deadweight person to his party. His words echo through the hall, leaving Kaoru absolutely stunned. She doesn't know why Budao would say things like that, because clearly, he changed. She thinks that it's because she failed to acknowledge his change, and that he has returned to his previous ways. Kaoru reaches an enlightening realization, and thinks that she is the one who has been looking down on him. Snorlax takes a beating from an orc, but stands his ground. He is capable of defeating the monster at last, and finally acquires level 4. It's only been 1 week since he was transported to this world. Since he has no party, he has chosen to dive into dungeons on his own. He hopes to stay away from the main objectives of the game. Budao descends to the 5th floor and is ecstatic that he leveled up to this point. The leveling system only gets more difficult as the game goes on. Dunx has prepared a number of gimmicks for him at this point in the game. One of them happens to be an obstacle called the bridge trap. The objective is to go across the bridge and gain the orc's hatred. After turning the monster hostile towards you, the creature will use its skill to call for its allies. After being chased by the monsters, the objective is to cross the bridge and then slice it off. The fall damage incurred upon the orcs will be marked as their defeat and allow for incredible amounts of experience points. Damn, that's one hell of a way to grind. Budao doesn't want to explore the bridge right now and hopes to return later. There are more gimmicks in the game that he has been looking forward to. Budao reaches the place called the Gate, which allows transportation to the adventurer's school, which cuts down on time. Even though he should be grateful for such a thing, he doesn't understand why nobody else is using it. It's not just the fact that he is able to access the slime room and other hunting locations, it's the fact that they are all empty and remain undiscovered by other players. It's a helpful location for actual players like him. Budao proceeds to activate the gate to test its functions. Suddenly, the arena simulates all around him, and he is transported to the basement of the school. These are the same coordinates he was sent to inside the game. Budao wants to go away before someone notices him, and to his demise, Murai just so happens to notice him. It's the definition of a "he's standing right behind me, isn't he?" moment. Budao experiences an "oh shit" moment while his teacher questions what he's doing on a holiday in such a location. Budao doesn't know if his teacher is aware of the gate's mechanics. Murai shoots him a cold glare. Budao tries to make an excuse and states that he forgot something and wanted to go early, but he lost track of time. Murai's face is enough to say that he isn't convinced. He turns away, minding his own business. This leads him to believe that the gate's location is unknown to the public, because he definitely would not have asked what he's doing in the basement. Then again, Budao thinks that his teacher may be intentionally turning a blind eye. Like the video and subscribe if you've made it this far into the story. He decides to believe that everyone somehow knows about it. Even though he wants to use the gate as a precious resource, he has to forcefully use the normal route to avoid suspicion. The following day, he challenges the bridge trap. Budao tests the strength of the bridge by taking slow steps ahead. Only a few steps in, he manages to cross the whole of the bridge and discovers the sleeping orcs. Budao is horrified to find a defeated adventurer who begs him to help his friends. Budao turns to realize that the orcs are pounding his friend's body. He forces himself to join the battle and hopes to lure at least one of the orcs away. He creates an opening and grabs the injured adventurer away from the orcs. At the same time, they are chasing him after his provocation. He finally reaches the other side of the bridge, takes out his blade, and cuts down the bridge, making the orcs fall to their doom. After the event, the injured adventurer was rescued by the medical team and asked for the chubby boy who saved him. The medical team declined, stating they missed him and wanted to hear some statements from Budao as well. Budao, on the other hand, returned and checked the situation with the guild. He discovered the injured fellow had lost 2 of his party members, who were confirmed dead. The realization that people died in the event stung him. It is as if he made a huge blunder by being in this world. His thoughts devour him because he didn't take matters seriously enough. He never thought that he could die in this world more easily than his previous one. While he is contemplating his brain into a rut, Kano greets her brother and asks about how he feels. Given the dead party members, Budao questions whether his sister would be willing to join the dungeon raid, even if it is against the law. Kano doesn't understand his request. Budao explains that he knows a backdoor entry into the dungeon. Kano reminds him that they'll get in trouble by breaking the rules. Budao explains that it will only happen if they get caught. He thinks that it's good for his sister to come along since she wants to become stronger. Budao explains that the skill fake allows a person to give the opponent false information. He wants her to learn this skill by heart. If you guys still haven't caught on, he's basically gaslighting her into gaslighting others. LMAO. Kano questions why he's pushing himself to this limit, even though he rejected the idea of diving in dungeons. Budao uses the example of the Class D student as a case for his resolve. He doesn't want his sister to be treated like that, and hopes that she is able to defend herself. Even though Kano doesn't like the idea, she finds herself motivated to follow him. Budao is glad that she's happy, even though he winged half of the conversation. He internalizes that the progression of the story causes a large number of characters to die. In the main storyline alone, His entire family is a bunch of mob characters. This is one other reason he wants to level up and become strong, as his family is at risk. He can't explain the events of the story to others and uses it to his sole advantage. Budao remembers the cruel sight of the orcs beating the party member to death. He feels strongly compelled to protect his loved ones. A week passes. Kano and Budao are going through the mountain. He's made sure to cover her up so that they can't identify his sister. This is also why they're taking a longer path to go to school. Budao questions if it is fine for him to tell her what he is about to do. They enter the school's basement, where Budao uses the gate to transport them right into the dungeon. He tells Kano that he will lure a large number of orcs, so she doesn't need to freak out. Kano thinks that her task is simply cutting the string. For one whole week, they've done various things to prepare for the upcoming event. Kano ended up preferring the machete to cut the string, while he opted for scissors. Kano waits for him until he returns with a horde of monsters chasing after him. She gets intimidated, but musters the courage to slice the rope. However, Kano's strength fails in cutting the rope. Budao jumps in and manages to cut the string with his scissors. The orcs once more fall to their doom. Kano apologizes for failing him and asks about his arm. Budao states that he's fine and apologizes for Kano's first experience. Suddenly, Kano experiences immense pain as a result of leveling up. In one fell swoop, she has leveled up to 5 with ease and allowed herself the ability to change jobs. Budao advises her about the starting class, which allows for a number of skill slots. Budao tells her that she'll feel different later on. On the other hand, Akagi's party has all leveled up to 5 as well. They decided to stick with their main class. Akagi keeps his role as a thief, while Kaoru chooses the fighter class. Only 1 week remains until his match against Kariya.